Christ is preeminent over creation. Listen to what Paul says in verse 15, 16, and 17. He says, he is, and on earth visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Remember, the philosophy that these heretics at Colossae were teaching was that creation itself was evil. It was not God. He was just a phantom that walked just a few inches above the earth, never touching anything that was created, again, because they believed everything that was created was evil. Paul here confronts that heresy by means as the image, Christ being the image of God, he was the representation and manifestation of God. That Christ came to represent and to show humanity what God was like. When you and I read that line there, the firstborn of all creation, we naturally think that Paul is saying that Christ was born like other things were born in creation. But this is not what the word firstborn here means. When Paul uses the word here, firstborn, he is not saying that Christ was born, the first one born of everything that was born. He uses it to speak of the fact that Christ alone has a privileged and prominent position that no one else has. Stay with me here. In the order of creation, Christ alone occupies a place that no one else could ever occupy. He is called the firstborn. It doesn't mean he was the first one physically born. As a matter of fact, when you read Psalm 89, verse number 27, the psalmist there says that God would make David the firstborn king. He would make David the firstborn would be king. And if you know anything about David's background, you understand David was not the firstborn in his family. It speaks of preeminence. It speaks of a privileged position. And Paul here is saying that though the false teachers are denying the deity of Christ, they are denying that Christ was God, he is saying that when God wanted to show humanity what he was like, he placed his image in his own son and sent his son to earth so that we might recognize he was the firstborn of all creation. Listen, John 1:18 says, no one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Did you hear what John says? He says, no one has ever seen God. Watch this. The only God who is at the Father's side, who is that? That's Jesus. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Hebrew writer in Hebrews 1 verses 2 through 3 says, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. Here it is. He is the radiance of the glory of God. Here it is. And the exact imprint, same word Paul uses here in verse 15, same imprint of his nature. And he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purifications for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. And then in John 14, when Jesus is talking about leaving the disciples, having to go and suffer on the cross, Philip comes to Jesus and he says to him, Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has saved, by saying Jesus was not just one of many emanations from God, he was God himself. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn, the one with privilege and prominence. The firstborn of all creation. That is, and Paul goes on to explain this in verse 16, he says, for by him all things were created. Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Watch what Paul says here. For by him, that is Jesus, all things were created. Again, he's trying to point the believers there in Colossae to the privileged, prominent position that Christ as God holds, not just as some emanation, some angel that walks some inches above the earth. He's trying to show them that Christ alone is the one who ordered and brought creation into being. Here is the theme of the Bible. Here's the theme of this hymn, verses 15 through 20. There are two themes, essential themes, that are part of this Christ hymn. One is creation and the other is redemption. The main theme of creation in Colossians 1, 15 through 20 is this simple fact that Christ was the one through whom the Father mediated or created everything that was created. Think of it this way. God the Father was the architect. God the Son was the contractor. And God the Holy Spirit gave the power to do the job. Let me say it again. Everything that has been created by God. God the Father came up with the plans. God the Son carried out the work. And God the Holy Spirit gave the power so that the work could be completed. Never let anyone dissuade you that Jesus is less than God. Jesus is preeminent and prominent over everything in creation. But notice how further Paul makes that truth clear. He says, watch this, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created. Here it is. Because Christ is who he is, everything in the celestial heavens was created by him. And everything on earth has been created by Jesus Christ. But in case you missed it, he wants to make sure you get it. He says, things you see and things you don't see all have been created by who? Nobody but Jesus. He is saying that as creation itself testifies that it needs a creator, Jesus is the one that created everything that's been created. And here's what you and I need to remember. We're part of that creation. That Christ has the preeminent privileged position of being the one who has authority even over our lives as created beings. Paul says we should submit to the authority of Christ because Christ is preeminent over all creation. Things in the heavens, things on earth, things visible, and things invisible. Even some stuff you can't see, that we cannot see, that Christ created. He has authority and rulership over all of creation. There are thousands of molecules running through this room right now that you and I can't even see. There are an inestimable, I never can say that word, an innumerable amount of atoms floating in all of the world. Here it is. There's not a one of them that Christ doesn't have authority over. That there's not one atom in all of the heavens and all of the earth and all of the seas that Christ does not have authority over. He created all things, but then Paul goes on here to say here, he says, not only did he create everything in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. When he talks about these rulers and dominions and authorities, most commentators think he's talking about the angels. Angels are created beings, and there are even some fallen angels who have a limited sense of authority. God didn't create them as evil angels. They chose to rebel after creation. And even in their rebellious state, watch this, Christ is